You're sitting in a meeting when someone interrupts you for the third time. Or maybe you're at a family gathering and someone makes another passive-aggressive comment about your life choices. Perhaps a colleague takes credit for your work right in front of you, expecting you to stay silent. In that moment, something inside you knows this isn't right. You feel the disrespect, but you don't know how to stop it without creating drama, without seeming aggressive, without losing your composure. Here's the truth most people never learn. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you command through the way you carry yourself, through the boundaries you set, and through the words you choose. The problem is, most people either say too much, explaining and justifying themselves until they seem weak, or they say nothing at all, swallowing their dignity because they don't want conflict. But there's a third path, and it's the path the Stoics walked for centuries. Today, I'm going to share with you 5 specific phrases rooted in Stoic philosophy that completely change how people treat you. These aren't magic spells, they're not tricks or manipulation, they're expressions of inner strength that the weak cannot fake and the strong cannot ignore. These 5 phrases do something remarkable. They draw a line in the sand without aggression, they demand respect without begging for it, and they end disrespect immediately because they come from a place of unshakable self-worth. Pay close attention, because what you're about to learn isn't just about what to say. It's about who you become when you say it. And that transformation, that shift from someone who tolerates disrespect to someone who naturally repels it, is what changes everything. Before we begin, I want you to do something that will anchor this lesson. Write this in the comments. I command respect through inner strength. Not for me, but for you. Because when you declare it publicly, you're making a commitment to yourself that starts right now. Let's begin. Phrase number 1. I've said what I needed to say. Most people lose respect because they over-explain. Someone questions their decision, and they immediately launch into a defensive monologue, listing reasons, justifying choices, seeking approval through explanation. But here's what they don't understand. Every extra word you add after your decision dilutes your authority. Every justification you offer is another invitation for someone to argue with you. The Stoics understood this perfectly. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." Your character speaks through your actions, not your explanations. When you feel compelled to justify yourself repeatedly, you're sending a clear message. I'm not sure I'm right, so please validate me. And people smell that uncertainty like blood in the water. Let me tell you about Michael. He was a manager at a tech company, talented but constantly undermined by his team. In meetings, he'd make a decision, then spend 15 minutes explaining why he made it. If someone questioned him, he'd provide even more justification, opening up every aspect of his reasoning to debate. What he thought was transparency was actually weakness. His team didn't respect him because he acted like his decisions needed their approval. The turning point came during a project deadline crisis. Michael decided to cut a non-essential feature. Immediately, 3 team members started arguing. In the past, Michael would have spent an hour defending his choice, getting pulled into debates about every alternative possibility. Instead, he said something different. I understand you disagree. I've considered your input. I've said what I needed to say. We're moving forward with this decision. Then he simply moved to the next agenda item. The room went quiet. No one challenged him further. Not because he was aggressive, but because his words carried finality. He wasn't inviting debate. He wasn't seeking consensus. He had made a decision, communicated it clearly, and that was the end of the discussion. Over the next months, something shifted. His team stopped treating every decision like a negotiation. They started respecting his authority because he started respecting it first. Here's the principle. When you've stated your position clearly once, maybe twice, that's enough. "I've said what I needed to say" is a boundary that tells people, "I don't owe you endless justification." It works in relationships when your partner keeps bringing up the same argument. It works with family when they question your choices repeatedly. It works professionally when colleagues want to debate every decision into paralysis. This phrase only works if you mean it. You can't say it, then get pulled back into explanation 5 minutes later. The Stoic mind is decisive. Epictetus taught that once you've determined the right course through reason, you commit to it fully. Doubt after decision is what destroys respect. Practice this. When you make a decision, state it clearly with brief reasoning. If someone questions it, you can acknowledge their concern once. But if they push further, use this phrase. "I've said what I needed to say." Then stop talking. The silence that follows is where your power lives. Most people can't tolerate that silence, so they fill it with more words, more justification, more weakness. You stay quiet, you let the boundary stand, and people learn very quickly that you don't debate your own decisions. Phrase number 2, "That doesn't work for me." Simple, direct, inarguable. Yet most people can't say it without adding 10 sentences of apology and explanation. "That doesn't work for me, but maybe I could try to make it work. Or if you really need me to, I guess I could rearrange things. I just have this other thing, but it's not that important. So if you really..." Stop. Every word after "that doesn't work for me" is you taking back your boundary. The reason this phrase commands respect is because it doesn't require the other person's agreement. You're not saying, "I don't think that's a good idea," and inviting them to convince you otherwise. You're not saying, "I'd rather not," and leaving room for them to pressure you. You're stating a fact about your life. This doesn't work for you. Period. There's nothing to debate, because you're the only authority on what works for you. I watched this transform a friendship that had become toxic. Lisa and Karen had been friends for a decade. But over the years, Karen had become increasingly demanding. Last-minute requests to babysit, borrowing money without clear repayment plans, expecting Lisa to drop everything whenever Karen had a crisis. Lisa felt used, but every time she tried to set a boundary, Karen would guilt-trip her or wear her down until Lisa gave in. The breaking point came when Karen called at 10 p.m. on a work night, demanding Lisa come over immediately because she was upset about a fight with her boyfriend. It was the third emergency that week. In the past, Lisa would have said, "Well, I have work in the morning and I'm really tired, but I guess I could come for a little while if you really need me." Not this time. "That doesn't work for me," Lisa said. Karen was stunned. "What do you mean it doesn't work for you?" "I'm your best friend." "I understand you're upset. That doesn't work for me tonight." "But, Karen, I'm going to sleep now. We can talk tomorrow." And she ended the call. Karen was furious for about 2 days. Then something interesting happened. She started respecting Lisa's time. The emergencies stopped. The demands decreased. Not because Karen suddenly became a better person, but because Lisa had finally drawn a line that couldn't be argued with. By stating her boundary as an inarguable fact rather than a negotiable preference, she changed the entire dynamic. This phrase works because it's self-evident. You don't need to justify what works or doesn't work for you. Your life, your time, your energy, your boundaries are yours to determine. The Stoics were clear about this. You control your choices. No one else gets to decide how you spend your limited time on this earth. Seneca wrote, "It's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." Every time you say yes to something that doesn't work for you, you're wasting the irreplaceable currency of your life. And you're teaching people that your boundaries are negotiable. Use this phrase without apology. Someone asks you to work late for the 3rd time this week. "That doesn't work for me." A family member expects you at an event you don't want to attend. That doesn't work for me. A friend wants you to loan them money when you're uncomfortable doing so. That doesn't work for me. You don't owe anyone an explanation beyond that. If they press, you can simply repeat it. I understand you'd like me to, but that doesn't work for me. The more comfortable you become with this phrase, the less people will test your boundaries, because they'll learn that you mean what you say. Phrase number 3. What you think of me is not my concern. This is perhaps the most powerful phrase in the Stoic arsenal, but also the most misunderstood. It doesn't mean you don't care about anything anyone thinks. It means you don't let others' opinions dictate your self-worth or your decisions. There's a massive difference between considering input from people you respect and being controlled by fear of judgment from people whose opinions shouldn't matter. Most disrespect comes from people testing whether you'll compromise yourself for their approval. They criticize your choices, question your capabilities, or make subtle digs designed to make you defensive. The natural response is to defend yourself, to explain, to try to change their mind. But that response gives them power over you. It says, "What you think of me is so important that I need to convince you you're wrong." David learned this lesson the hard way. He worked in finance, and he decided to leave a high-paying corporate job to start his own consulting practice. The judgment was immediate. Colleagues said he was throwing away his career. His father said he was being irresponsible. Friends questioned whether he was having a midlife crisis. For weeks, David defended his decision to anyone who would listen, seeking validation, trying to prove he wasn't making a mistake. Then his mentor, a man he deeply respected, said something that changed everything. "You're wasting energy trying to control what you can't control. Their opinions are their business. Your choices are yours. Stop asking for permission to live your life." David realized he'd been making his decision conditional on others' approval. He'd given them authority over his path. The next time someone questioned his choice, David said simply, "I appreciate your concern, but what you think of my decision is not my concern. I've made my choice. No defense, no explanation, no attempt to convince." His uncle was offended. "So you don't care what your family thinks?" David responded, "I care about your well-being. I don't need you to approve of my career choices." The conversation ended. His uncle never brought it up again. 2 years later, David's business was thriving. Interestingly, the people who had been most critical were now asking him for advice. Why? Because he'd demonstrated something they couldn't argue with. He lived according to his own judgment, not their fears. That kind of certainty commands respect because it's rare. The Stoics were obsessed with this principle. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that other people's opinions were just thoughts in their minds, having no power over him unless he gave them power. This isn't arrogance, it's liberation. When you stop performing for an audience that doesn't matter, you become authentically powerful. Here's how to apply this. When someone criticizes you or questions your choices, you first ask yourself, is this person someone whose judgment I value? Do they have my best interests at heart? Do they have relevant expertise? If yes, consider their input seriously. If no, then their opinion is just noise. You don't need to be rude. You can say, "Thank you for sharing your thoughts," and then internally remind yourself, "What they think of me is not my concern." You don't argue. You don't defend. You simply continue on your path. This phrase, used correctly, ends disrespect because it removes the power dynamic. People disrespect you when they believe their opinion should control your behavior. When you make it clear that their opinion has no such power, there's nothing left to disrespect. You're not seeking their approval, so they can't withhold it as leverage. Phrase number 4. I'm not debating this. Some people mistake every conversation for an opportunity to prove they're right. They'll argue with you about anything, your decisions, your preferences, your experiences, even your feelings. They're not trying to understand you, they're trying to win. And if you engage with them on those terms, you've already lost respect because you've accepted that your position needs to be defended. This phrase is a circuit breaker. It ends the pattern immediately. I'm not debating this tells the other person that you're not playing the game. You're not interested in convincing them. You're not inviting them to convince you. The discussion is over, not because you're running away, but because you recognize it's pointless. Rachel dealt with this constantly with her mother-in-law, Margaret. Every holiday, every family gathering, Margaret would make comments about Rachel's parenting choices. When Rachel chose to breastfeed longer than Margaret approved of, Margaret would lecture her about how children become too dependent. When Rachel decided to work part-time, Margaret questioned whether she was prioritizing her career over her children. If Rachel defended her choices, Margaret would double down, pulling out articles, citing research, turning every conversation into a debate. For years, Rachel tried to win these debates. She'd prepare counter-arguments, bring her own research, explain her reasoning in detail. It never worked. Margaret wasn't interested in understanding Rachel's choices. She was interested in being right. Rachel was exhausted and her husband could see the toll it was taking. Then Rachel tried something different. At Thanksgiving, Margaret started in again about Rachel's decision to use a particular parenting method. Rachel looked at her calmly and said, "Margaret, I'm not debating this. We parent differently, and that's okay." Margaret tried to continue. "But you need to understand that," Rachel repeated, "I'm not debating this," and changed the subject to ask about Margaret's recent trip. Margaret was shocked. She tried twice more to restart the argument. Each time, Rachel said the same thing. "I'm not debating this." By the end of the evening, Margaret had stopped. Not just for that night, but in general. She realized that Rachel was no longer available for those conversations. Without an opponent, the debate couldn't happen. And over time, something unexpected occurred. Margaret actually started respecting Rachel's decisions because Rachel had demonstrated they weren't up for discussion. The Stoic principle here is crucial. Not everything deserves your engagement. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion. There is never any need to get worked up or to trouble your soul about things you can't control." Some arguments exist only because you agree to participate. When you refuse to debate, you're not being closed-minded. You're being discerning about where you invest your energy. This phrase works in countless situations. A colleague wants to argue about politics at work. I'm not debating this. A friend insists on relitigating an old disagreement. I'm not debating this. Someone online wants to fight about your opinion. I'm not debating this, or better yet, just don't respond. The key is that you say it once, calmly, and then you stop engaging. You don't defend your refusal to debate. That itself would be a debate. You simply state it and move on. People who respect themselves don't waste time trying to convince people who aren't open to being convinced. They recognize that their energy is valuable and they allocate it wisely. When you master this phrase, you'll find that people stop bringing certain topics to you. They learn that you're not available for pointless arguments, and paradoxically, they respect you more for it because you've demonstrated that your time and peace of mind are not for sale. Phrase number 5, I expect better from you. This is the phrase that turns the tables completely. When someone disrespects you, the natural instinct is to get defensive or angry. But both responses put you in a reactive position. You're responding to their behavior, which gives them control of the interaction. This phrase does something different. It puts the burden back on them by expressing a standard they've failed to meet. I expect better from you carries immense weight because it does several things simultaneously. First, it makes their disrespect explicit without you having to get emotional about it. Second, it implies that you had a higher opinion of them, which most people care about even if they pretend not to. Third, it establishes that you have standards for how people treat you, and those standards aren't negotiable. Fourth, it ends the interaction with you in the position of judgment rather than defense. James used this with a colleague who had repeatedly tried to undermine him in meetings. The colleague, Tom, would make subtle comments designed to make James look incompetent, questioning his research, suggesting his ideas weren't well thought through, even making jokes at James's expense. James had initially tried to laugh it off. Then he tried matching the energy, making his own subtle digs. Nothing worked, and he was increasingly frustrated. After one particularly disrespectful comment in a meeting, James waited until afterwards and approached Tom privately. He didn't accuse or attack. He simply said, "Tom, the comment you made in there was disrespectful. I expect better from you." Then he walked away. No argument, no discussion, just a clear statement of standard and consequence. Tom was rattled. He tried to brush it off. "I was just joking." But James didn't engage. He'd said what needed to be said. Over the next weeks, Tom's behavior changed completely. He stopped the undermining comments. He was actually professional. Why? Because James had done something unexpected. He'd treated Tom's disrespect as a failure on Tom's part, not a successful attack. He'd maintained the high ground while making the boundary absolutely clear. This phrase works because it appeals to something most people have, even when they're being disrespectful, a self-image of being a decent person. When you say, "I expect better from you," you're holding up a mirror. You're saying, the person you're being right now doesn't match who you claim to be. That creates cognitive dissonance. Most people will adjust their behavior to resolve that dissonance rather than accept that they're the person who treats others poorly. The Stoics understood this deeply. They believed in appealing to people's higher nature rather than descending to their lower one. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." When someone disrespects you, becoming disrespectful yourself might feel satisfying in the moment, but it lowers you to their level. Maintaining your standards and expecting them to rise to meet those standards is more powerful. Use this phrase when someone who should know better treats you poorly. Not with strangers or people you don't know, that's different. But with colleagues, friends, family members, people who have a relationship with you and should understand basic respect. "I expect better from you" works because it references the relationship and the standards that should exist within it. Say it calmly, say it once, then disengage. Don't wait for their response or get pulled into a discussion about whether they were actually being disrespectful. You've set the standard. How they respond to that standard is up to them, but you've made clear that falling below it has consequences, even if that consequence is just your stated disappointment. When you master these 5 phrases, something profound happens in your life. You stop tolerating disrespect, not through aggression or constant conflict, but through clarity about who you are and what you will and won't accept. People sense this immediately. It's not what you say as much as the place those words come from. They come from someone who has decided that their dignity is not negotiable, that their time is valuable, that their peace matters. The Stoics spent their entire philosophy building this foundation, the understanding that your worth is inherent, not granted by others, that you control your responses, your boundaries, your standards. That respect isn't something you beg for. It's something that naturally flows to those who respect themselves first. These 5 phrases are simply expressions of that internal reality. But here's what you must understand. These phrases only work if they're backed by genuine inner strength. You can't fake this. If you say, "I've said what I needed to say," but then immediately backtrack when pushed, you've made things worse. If you say, "That doesn't work for me," but then agree to it anyway, you've taught people your words mean nothing. If you claim others' opinions don't concern you, but then obsess over what they think, the contradiction is obvious. That's why this isn't just about memorizing 5 phrases, it's about becoming the kind of person who means what they say and says what they mean. It's about building the internal foundation that makes these words powerful. And that's the work of Stoicism, the daily practice of aligning your actions with your principles, of strengthening your character, of learning to be unmoved by things that shouldn't move you. Start today. Not by looking for opportunities to use these phrases, but by building the mindset that makes them natural. Practice making decisions and standing by them. Practice setting boundaries without apology. Practice caring less about the opinions of people who don't matter. Practice refusing to engage in pointless debates. Practice holding others to high standards while maintaining your own. When you do this work, you'll find that you use these phrases less and less, not because you've forgotten them, but because people stop testing you. They recognize something in how you carry yourself that says clearly, this person respects themselves too much to tolerate disrespect. And most people, when confronted with that kind of grounded strength, will either rise to meet it or remove themselves from your life. Either outcome is a win. Now I want you to do something. Write in the comments, "I command respect through inner strength." This isn't just a phrase. It's a declaration of who you're becoming. It's a reminder that respect starts with you, with how you see yourself, with the standards you set and maintain. Every time you look back at that comment, let it remind you of this moment, of this decision to stop tolerating what shouldn't be tolerated. If this resonated with you, if you're committed to building the kind of inner strength that naturally commands respect, subscribe to this channel. Every week we explore Stoic wisdom that transforms how you show up in the world. Hit that like button so more people can discover that they don't have to accept disrespect, that there's a better way to live with dignity and power. Remember what Marcus Aurelius taught. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Every moment of disrespect you've experienced has been preparing you for this transformation. Use it, learn from it, and become the person who never has to experience it again, not because you've become aggressive or defensive, but because you've become unshakable. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this work. Until next time, stay stoic, stay strong, and remember, respect is not negotiated, it's commanded.